Hey everybody, welcome to my review of the Lexmoto LXR380. Okay, so as you may know, I've had this bike on loan from Lexmoto for about 6 weeks or so to make a review. I've been using it as my daily runner through everything. Through all these recent storms we've had, I've driven it through floods. I've used it to go on motorways, down to the shops, everything, to test it to the best ability that I can to give you some answers. Now, it's important to point out that I have actually made lots and lots of videos on specific things to do with this bike. So if you want to check out those videos on my channel, they may answer in more depth each thing. This is going to kind of be an overview, and I'll reference to other videos if you want to know a lot more. Okay, so let's start at the top. The LXR380 is very similar looking, because it is basically the same bike, to the LXR125. All they've done is they've crammed in a 380cc parallel twin engine. It's a 6-speed. On paperwork it says that it has 40 brake horsepower. I'm not necessarily fully convinced that that's actually how much power it's got. I have been comparing this to my other half, CBR 500R, which is 48 brake horsepower, and I'll talk about that later in the video, but that's the sort of the bike I've been comparing this to, because I know that bike is right up against that 48 brake horsepower limit. But let's just have a look at the bike to start with. Looks-wise, it is, of course, very Ducati-esque. You know, it's Panigale a bit in the front, tails a little bit like one of the other models of Ducati. I'm trying to put my finger on it at the moment with these intakes. This is something I need to talk about as well. There is a little list of things on this bike which are small issues, things that can be improved, things that can be fixed. Hopefully Lexmoto will take some of them on board. But yeah, as you can see, it's a nice looking little sports bike. Light feeling bike, but I say it's light feeling, but it's not that light. It weighs nearly 200 kilos. But I almost don't believe it. I've said to them, I'd love to be able to weigh this thing. I'm sure it does weigh that. It's probably just all down in the bottom of the chassis, and it's good for that. It actually makes it very light and flickable feeling, because you've got the stability of having the weight all low down. There's nothing particularly trick about this bike, you know, as in what's on it. It's a very simple bike, you know. You've just controls, for instance, you just have the standard fare, you know, clutch, your high beam flasher, high beam, low beam, hazards, indicators, horn. This is the light switch to go between low beam and high, sorry, not low beam and high beam, to go from side lights to full, but you're going to want to leave that on maximum all of the time. Start button down here, kill switch obviously. This does have an adjustable front brake lever. That's about as trick as it gets, as I say, with this bike. Otherwise it's just standard stuff. The price of this bike is about £3,800. That's with a 2-year parts and labour warranty. I'm comparing this, as I say, to the CBR 500R because my other half's got one, and it's the easiest thing to me to compare it to, and it's a pretty good yardstick in the A2 market. That bike is a little over £6,000, so this isn't far off of half the cost of the CBR 500R. Now, I know a lot of people will say, but hold on, I could just go and buy a second-hand bike. Yes, you can. I've done a video on that. I actually went and looked on Auto Trader and saw what we could get second-hand or new for the same money as the LXR380. If you want to watch that, as I say, look on my channel. Right, well, let's go for a little ride. I'll talk about it some more, and towards the end of the video I'm going to talk about the list of issues that I have with this bike, little bits and pieces that you can make changes to when you buy it new, or things that I think Lexmoto maybe want to think about addressing in the future. Okay, so the simple question is, what do I think of the LXR380? I love this little bike. Yes, it's basic, yes, it's got its flaws, yes, it's got some problems. I think most of those are pretty acceptable for a bike which costs £3,800 opposed to, say, the £6,000 that CBR 500R costs. The CBR 500R is a better bike. It feels more powerful. It's got a much more sophisticated feeling suspension. The build quality feels better overall. I wouldn't say it was low on this bike. There's plenty of good things on this bike. The frame's really nice and stuff like that, but you know, there's some bits that show its cheapness. I prefer the handling of this bike. It's more sporty, it's more direct. The seating position of this is far more sports orientated opposed to, that was a very wide line, opposed to the CBR 500R, which feels far more commutery in its more upright stance. I have been trying out Reno's bike, like jumping backwards and forwards between this and that, just to feel the differences, and it feels more solid. The sound from it is far deeper. The power delivery is much more sophisticated feeling. It's much rounder. The power just comes in nice, rounded, strong lumps. This kind of has to wind up to it, and it feels a bit tinny at times, but it feels light, and it makes it exciting to ride because it just flicks through corners lovely. The turn-in is much more aggressive, much more sporty feeling. There's just something about it, there's just fun. It loves to lean. It's so easy to ride, you know, faster, because it just loves to get through the tight little curves. Now, as I mentioned, I do have the full Lextek system in the ECU on this bike, so it is producing a bit more power than the stock, and it sounds a little bit louder than the stock, and a bit better, and the power delivery is a little bit better. You can actually watch my whole comparison video of that system to find out all the differences. But it hasn't changed this bike so much that I haven't forgotten what it was like when it was stock to be able to give this review and let you know what it feels like. It was still massively fun back then. The new ECU, yeah, it added a little bit more grunt, but the handling was the main thing for me. It wasn't about the power. Now, as I say, the suspension on the CBR 500R is better than the suspension on this in the sense of the quality of the feel, the sophisticatedness of the feel of the ride. It's better on that. This is much firmer and sportier, but it doesn't feel sort of sophisticated, firm and sporty. It feels cheaper bike sporty, but it's still good. You know, for going through the corners, you get plenty of feel, loads and loads of feel. You can feel the grip coming and going. And that, I suppose I should mention, the tyres that came on this bike have been great. Not too bad in the wet. In the dry, they feel very sticky. I haven't pushed it on a track or something to find out the true abilities of these tyres, but they feel fine to me. One of the other places that the LXR doesn't feel as sophisticated as the CBR is the EFI on this bike. It is just a different type of thing in the sense that it just feels very connected to the bike and it responds very fast. It feels like a good EFI system. On this, it feels a little bit agricultural, a little bit basic. It doesn't mean it's harder to ride, it just means it doesn't feel quite as premium. But I think that kind of adds to its rusticness, if you know what I mean. You know, the light feel of it, the less sophisticated EFI, the less sophisticated suspension, all these things, you know, they're all not great, but somehow together they just make it a lot of fun because it's proper honest biking. You feel like the bike got around the corner well because you got it round the corner well. I'm not saying that any other bike does it for you. I'm just saying it's something about it that it just flicks my switches. It's super fun. So the best 0 to 60 I got of this bike in its stock configuration was about 7 seconds, 7.1 I think it was, and the best 0 to 60 I got with a new configuration of the new ECU, which is technically not A2 legal, but it's still in development. As I say, watch that video for more information. That was down to like 6.5 seconds. So it's slower than the CBR 500R because that has a claimed 0 to 60 time of 5 seconds. Now, in the past, when it was in its stock configuration, I thought I'd got this bike to its top speed. Turns out when I look back at the video, I was in 5th. So I can tell you that this bike in stock trim's top speed in 5th is 80 miles an hour. So what are we going to guess for 6th? Maybe 90, maybe 95, something like that for 6th gear. As I say, I can only know the 5th gear figure. So I compared it with the new ECU, and this bike was getting 96 in 5th. It's interesting that it only became half a second faster with the new ECU for the 0 to 60 time, but was doing so much better at the other end. I'm guessing that's, as I've said, I think the tune might be a bit too rich down the bottom end maybe, and a bit more air might open that up. Maybe it's just running, you know, getting more air and working better towards the top end, and that's why you're getting that definite difference in performance. So the top speed of this with the full system on it, the new system, I guess, is around 100, and it might be a bit more than that, but I'm just going to say around 100, and in the stock configuration probably around 90. But in both configurations it cruises at 70 absolutely fine, no problem at all. a strange thing about the EFI. As I mentioned, it does feel a little bit basic, it feels a little bit simple. There is a strange thing, other than well, there's actually two strange things. One of them is that if you're cruising like this, and you just get off the throttle, so the bike is coasting along, well, not coasting, it's powered coasting, so it's just happy cruising at that speed, all the vibrations of the engine just go away, and it feels like the engine stopped running. It's very strange, because when you're on the when you're downshifting, or you're on the overrun, or you're accelerating, you feel a rumble through the bike, a vibration. But when you're in that window, it all goes away. So it's positive, it's responsive, it feels light, it doesn't feel like it's 200 kilos that it's reported to be. It's proper fun. And I'm actually a little bit sad that I got this so early in the year over the winter and through these storms, because I would love to try this in 20 degrees on some dry, you know, country roads and properly start to rip it around, because it's mega fun. And that is no different in its stock configuration. It was still great fun then. As I say, it hasn't made the biggest difference in the world, this new system, but it has done a little. The brakes on this bike are great. The front brake is very firm, very positive. It's got ABS, and I haven't found that it's too intrusive or anything like that. The rear brake is perfectly fine. ABS works well. It does come in a little bit early, but then it's the rear brake, so it's trying to stop the bike from locking up, obviously. Now, one of the nice things about the CBR 500R is the amount of engine braking you get on downshifts. And you do get engine braking from this, good strong engine braking, but not so high up in the rev range. You have to get the revs right down before it really kicks in. Otherwise, it can almost feel like it's got a slipper clutch if you're, you know, coming down. I think the gearing's very long, but you know, if you bang down the box, it's going to lock up the rear like that. Turning circle on this bike. Okay, well, I'm 6'4", and I have to get my knee out of the way, but you know, this is not a bad turning circle. It's certainly not as bad as a lot of sports bikes. You're not doing 50-point turns to get you know, around in the road. It is a very comfortable bike. The only thing I will say is, if you're a bigger chap, you will find that the seat, you don't have a lot of space front to back necessarily. You know, this is perfect for me. The rear of the seat is hugging the back of my butt, and my balls are pressed into the tank, to be honest. If you're not careful, as I say, going over bumps and stuff, you will rack your balls into your tank if you are of the ball owning persuasion, and it can be quite painful. There we go. So as you can see here, it's a little place to be sitting, and this is quite flat. As I say, I am quite a big chap, so that is part of it. But if you were, should we say, a little bit more mighty, you might find yourself squeezing in between, a little tight and uncomfortable, especially around the gentleman's area. See, I'm doing 70. If you're on a really big, powerful bike, that would have put you into almost license losing sort of speeds. This thing, you can use it. It is a bit like a 125 in the sense that it's fun because you can ride the living crap out of it. It is quite narrow, so it is good for filtering, getting through those gaps. And it's got the power to pull ahead. This is where the sophistication is, or lack of, is felt. Like on the CBR, you know, this would feel much smoother. It would be dampened out better. The dampening is a little basic. It's firm, and that's it, it's firm. Oh, there is another oddity with the EFI I should have mentioned, and this is the same with the stock, although it's more pronounced audibly with the new system on it. So I'm going to stop, and you can hear the engine idling. Yeah, it's fine. Revs up nicely. If you just get on the throttle a little bit, it's going to get into a strange pattern. You hear that? It's still fine, it's not a miss. So you'll even do it in third, about 25, 26 miles an hour, it's doing it now. But as I say, it isn't a misfire, and it isn't bogging at that point. It's just a strange thing this bike does. Okay, so now it's time to talk about the little list of little issues that I have with this bike. Some of them are something that you can solve yourself. Some of them are things I would be proactive about fixing before you have a problem. And some of them are maybe something that Lexmoto should consider changing or updating in the future. Okay, so number one is the side stand. It is too long. This bike sits far too upright. During the recent windy weather, it has been a little bit of a concern at times when I've parked this bike. If the road isn't tilting, away a bit, so you can emphasise the lean into the side stand, it's so upright that the wind could blow it over. Here, I'm okay because the ground's tipping away, but naturally it sits more upright, and it won't take so much to knock it over that way. So, side stand's a little bit long. It looks like it's got enough meat in that if it was my bike, I might consider trying to use an angle grinder just to take a little bit off the bottom and see if you can gain a couple of degrees over this way, but equally you don't want to go too thin with that. While we're at the side stand kill switch placement is not great. I have been having problems with the side stand kill switch on this bike, in the sense of that when I go to pull away, when I put it into first with the side stand up, it kills the engine because it thinks the side stand is still down. The reason this has happened is because that side stand switch, which is right in there on the absolute underneath of the bike, completely unprotected, which isn't a particularly well weather sealed looking one, it just looks like the standard one you'd normally see somewhere up here. It's right under the bike, getting full of water and crud. I have driven this through a flood 3 or 4 times, so that has been fully submerged. So it could be partially my fault, but over time that is something that is going to happen. It's one of the reasons I push these bikes and abuse them a bit, because by submerging it I found a problem which might not have shown itself for a while through normal use. So side stand, how would you fix that? Either take the switch out, which you obviously got to be careful there, because if you try and start the bike in first with the really short side stand, it's going to go over. So you don't particularly want to do that, but that is going to be the easiest option. Because unless you can find another switch that's more weatherproof and happens to be there, it kind of is what it is. In another video, you saw me riding back in the dark, and the low beam headlights on this bike are pretty abysmal. They're not very powerful. Candles in jam jars is one thing. These are probably something else. Big part of that is the angle of the adjustment of the front beams. I do think that you can adjust them. I can see screws and stuff in the back of here that look like it's going to adjust the tilt of the lenses. I haven't tried to do that because frankly I only rode this at night once and I wasn't going to get into it, but it is something that will have to be adjustable because for your MOT it has to be correct. So there will be adjustment in there. You can sort that out to a point, but as I say, the throw of those lights isn't great. Now, they're not as bad as they look in the video. This is something that a lot of people don't seem to understand, which is that a camera on my head is not a human eye and does not have anywhere near the sensitivity of the human eye. So what you see is very much darker. But it wasn't lighting signs because it was too low down. With the high beam on, it was okay. It was throwing like plenty distance. I could see the road markings, etc. And it was okay. But obviously, you're either blinding everyone all the time or you're having to be switching backwards and forwards. So there is another thing. Okay, the chain, that's another one, and there's a few issues to this. Number one, the strange thing about this bike is that when it is as is, the chain is quite tight. When you sit on the bike, it becomes looser. Now, as you may know if you ride bikes and do work on them, that's the opposite way around to the way it normally works. It's normally looser when the bike is sat, and when you sit on it, the chain becomes tighter. That is why you need to make sure that you check your chain adjustments with the weight of the rider on, because you can get it looking right while you're off the bike, but then you get on it and you're putting far too much pressure on it. This does the opposite thing. So you almost have to over tighten it on its side stand, so when you're riding it, it's right. I actually did a little bit of filming just to test this, and unfortunately I lost that footage when I lost some other files, but I put the camera on the side of the bike and just had a look going along, and it was amazing that what looked like a tight chain when it was at the side was flopping around like mad when I was sat on it. So that is an oddity which you should be aware of, because it meant, to start with, the chain was much looser than it should have been, and I thought it was like that, but then I got off the bike and checked it and thought, no, it feels fine. As I say, that's the thing to be aware of. Now, because of this, it would seem that the chain adjustments are really regular, because I got it so it was correct, and I've ridden it for a few hundred miles, and the front sprocket started to jump again if I was really hammering it on the 0 to 60 runs. Now, any bike is going to do that if the chain is loose, but it was surprising that it happened so soon, but also so hard to track because, as I say, with this weird thing of sitting on it and not sitting on it and it being backwards. The other thing to note about this chain is on this bike it is a 530 size chain. It's too big for a 380, it doesn't need to be that big. A 520 would be fine, and I actually do think that this chain is definitely too big for this bike because you will notice those telltale little cut marks in a pattern around the edge of the tyre where it's actually been hitting, the chain's been hitting the edge of the tyre and taking that little corner off. I would say, if this was my bike, that I would replace these chain and sprockets when it comes to it with a 520 size, so it's a little narrower, and you should be fine. I have even questioned if this chain even belongs on here and whether it was just something they had around at Lexmoto, because this is the demo bike, to just stick on it for now. But I think that is the standard. It's surprising and unnecessary. Do keep in mind when I say about these cuts, with the chain being as loose as it was for a while, that could be because it was flopping and slapping around so much. But this could happen to anyone if you didn't know that it does the adjustments differently. A couple other small ones. This might only affect me because I'm 6'4", and I can't say I noticed this in the 125 version, but the view angle of these dials, they're tilted too far down, so when I'm up riding I'm looking so far down at them at that angle that they're a little bit faded, and it's sometimes difficult to see what's being displayed. When I duck my head down a bit, they turn to jet black, and you can see them clear as day. So view angle on that is a little bit, I think it could have been up a little bit more, but then equally I'm somewhat of a giant. This bike is not as small as it looks, trust me. I haven't noticed any rust on this bike in any particular place other than a couple of fasteners. This is something that happens with these bikes, they put them together and they have maybe a different batch of fasteners from somewhere, but there's 2 or 3 on the side of this bike which have got a little bit of rust on the inside of them. It could be from a tool that was used on them and it's just surface rust, but nothing else is rusting. These are all fine, these are fine, but this one here's got a bit of rust in it. So, like with the earlier days with the Lexmotos, I said, really spend the extra 10 quid it costs to get some better fasteners, and stop there being any rust anywhere, because one little rusty bolt will make someone have a much lower opinion of a bike than if it doesn't have any. And last but not least are these intakes here. Now obviously these are to emulate an intake on a Ducati. There is a couple of models that use them like this, and they look kind of cool. They perform no purpose whatsoever for the bike, but they are actually a problem, and I don't know why anyone didn't see this coming. So we'll just put the key in underneath the bike, take off this seat. Now, can you see that this goes in? We have some mesh here. There is absolutely nothing stopping water coming in here. So effectively what these are doing is not anything beneficial. They are just allowing water to be inducted into the bike, into where the electrics are. There is a plastic tray in here, and it means that the water kind of runs down into where the electrics are. So there wasn't a huge amount of water in there. There was a tiny little bit of water in the bottom of one of these lips, I noticed, and that's how I knew water was getting in. I don't think it's getting around the edges too much because you have got an overhang of the seat here. But yeah, if it was my bike, I would work out some way of sealing those off so water is not being ingressed into the back of the bike. A little bit short-sighted design, I think, but it is what it is. But I think that probably covers everything I need to say. If I have missed anything out, leave a comment. I'll answer it as quickly as I can. I've talked so much about this bike, it's difficult to know if you've hit every single thing. As I say, if you are genuinely interested in buying this bike, do watch all the videos I've made on it, because I've obviously gone into far more depth about different things. But for people who've got a passing interest and want a cursory sort of overview of this bike, I think that's enough detail. Yes, it's got some flaws, but those flaws actually bring character. The basic EFI and stuff, it works perfectly fine, but because when you get it right, it feels just more rewarding. I don't know, it's hard to explain. If you're looking for just a general fun bike for commuting, for having fun at the weekends, for going through the country roads, stuff like that, this bike is brilliant. If you want something that's far more sophisticated, something that's really maybe aimed more at being as fast as you can on a track or something like that, much more precise, much more, as I say, sophisticated, that's the thing. It's just, this is more basic. Sure, go for something else. Whether you're on an A2 or the full license, it's got enough power to get you around town, to sit on the motorway and do pretty much everything you're going to want it to do. The reported miles to the gallon is about 80. Now, with the new ECU and me riding the ever-living crap out of it, I was getting closer to 50. But of course that 80 figure will be someone driving very properly, not using too many revs, opposed to me where I'm just wringing its neck constantly. If you're interested in one, I really strongly suggest going and taking one for a ride, because all these things about the feel of the bike are something that you'll notice straight away. And if it's something that you go, oh, I don't like that, I mean, obviously things change with time and you get to like things grow on you. That's part of a bike building character. And as I say, it's bikes' flaws or bikes' shortcomings can be part of their character. But if it is too much for you, then you'll know. If you enjoyed this video or the series of videos that I've done on this bike, please remember to hit that like button on those videos. I really would appreciate it. It helps me a lot. And subscribe if you're not subscribed, because I'm on my way to 100k and I really appreciate that too. If you really enjoy the content I produce, please consider joining my Patreon for as little as $1 a month, but I'll tell you more about that on the outro card. Huge thanks, of course, goes to Lexmoto for lending me the bike. Thanks to Lextek for sending me out that system. I think it was important to show what I think most people would want to do to this bike. Sure, I think there's a few more things that could be done. Maybe stick on a tail tidy, even though that one's not too bad. But I don't know if you'll find one that fits, but I'm sure you could get something to work. Maybe some, shorter levers, something like that. I don't know what the fitment on those is, as to what the equivalent you need to get is, or if Lextek have got them developing. They should do. But yeah, enough talking. I'll let you go. Bye-bye. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to hit the like button and subscribe to see future videos. This channel is made possible by the support of the audience. Please consider joining my Patreon to get early access to videos, questions answered in the monthly Q&A, your name on screen, and some exclusive content, all for as little as $1 a month. You can also check out the links in the description to my merch and other ways to directly support the channel. Thanks for watching.